Anno 117 is a very complex game with a bunch of different systems, new and old, that you'll need to learn if you're to successfully govern your islands. Let's go through everything from setting up your game to taking out other rulers so that you know just what to do when you boot up your first game. When starting a game of Anno 117, you have two choices. The campaign provides more of a story-led game with a little more direction, whereas Sandbox lets you do whatever you want. For your first game, campaign is a great idea to show you the ropes, but once you know what you're doing, Sandbox is the way to go for the most possible freedom. Choosing your governor name, portrait, and banner is purely cosmetic, so follow your heart. Difficulty has 3 presets, but you can customize each of these to get the exact game that you want. We're going to keep things simple and go with normal, and if you want some extra tips, hit edit and make sure tutorials are enabled. Content is where you enable any DLC, but for the sake of this tutorial, I'll be sticking to vanilla since there is more than enough to talk about and play in just the base game. Governors is where you can choose what other rulers you'd like to play with, and each one has their own difficulty level and personality that will dictate their playstyle. I would say just stick with the default normal options for the smoothest game, but don't be afraid to familiarize yourself with all the options just to get an idea of how they will behave. Once everything is in place, you can choose to start in Latium or Albion, and I would suggest Latium since it's the main region of the game with the most to do, and you'll unlock Albion later anyway, so you're not missing out on anything. With all that out of the way, we can set sail and get our game moving. When you first load into the game, you'll have an island and your starting ship, and you'll want to get both of these to work more or less immediately. If you really want to min-max, you can pause the game whilst you queue everything up, but Anno is mostly a chill game, so don't feel the need to if you don't want. Ship first, since what we're going to do is extremely simple. Select it, hold shift, and then right click around the map in this sort of pattern. We're doing this to cover as much of the map as possible, and this is going to give us all kinds of useful information that will come in useful later. First of all, it will discover other islands, which may end up being good candidates for colonization later. Secondly, you will find other governors in your game along with NPC shopkeepers and quest givers. And third, you'll find the pirate base so you know exactly where to avoid. This will likely take some time, so you can leave it roaming whilst you get busy with your island. Just be sure to keep an eye on it if it gets attacked, as you really don't want to lose it this early if you can help it. Back on the island, and we're going to want to set up your first timber production chain, and to do this you need a woodcutter and a sawmill. Woodcutters need to be placed nearby to plenty of trees, so select a patch close to your trading post to cut down on travel time. Place a sawmill between it and your trading post, and boom, your people will get to work producing timber. With this, you'll be able to build all kinds of fun stuff, like your very first Libertas residences. These are how you increase the population of your island, and you're going to want to build quite a lot. Once you've built your first few, as long as the game isn't paused, you'll notice the new Liberty tab open up on the Build toolbar. From here, you'll be able to build everything they need to be happy, and it's here that we can start making some choices. To illustrate this further, you can click on any residence and get a breakdown of their needs. For each type, you have 2 choices of goods you can supply, and to satisfy this enough to progress to the next tier of residence, you only have to satisfy one of them. This means you can choose between goods depending on what you can and can't create and the effects you want to bring to the populace. For example, their first need is food, and you can produce either sardines or porridge. Sardines increase population and income per residence by 1, whereas porridge instead grants 2 population but no income. Early on, sardines are the easy choice since they only require a single building and give you some income, but as the game goes on, these choices become less clear and you'll have to decide which goods to produce to keep your islands progressing. You can choose to produce both options of goods, which will grant you both sets of bonuses, but you need the space, resources, and population to perform all of these jobs, so it may be worth waiting until later to do this. As you fulfill needs and build more residences, more needs will open up, like public service and fashion, all of them offering you a couple of choices for what you want to build. Some, like markets, require buildings to be placed centrally to spread their influence to as many residents as possible, so don't be afraid to move things around to find just the right spot for everything. Once you've fulfilled all needs, you'll gain the ability to upgrade your Libertas to the next tier. This starts the whole process over again with a fresh set of goods, usually with some more complex supply chains. It's worth noting that these higher tier residents will also consume the previous tier's goods, though goods of a higher tier will be more efficient at filling up those bars. You will also unlock the ability to produce the next tier of construction material in the form of tiles. Once again, these have a more complex production chain than timber, so you'll need plenty of space and workers to start producing. It's at this point that you enter the mid-game and where things really start to pick up. From here on, production chains become more complex and buildings start to bring effects not just to the population but also to other surrounding buildings. We get the first signs of this with the Liberty fashion buildings, both of which grant bonuses to surrounding buildings. This means rather than placing all of your production far from your residences, it can be beneficial to have the final product created in the heart of your island to pass on their bonuses to as many buildings as possible. However, these effects are not always beneficial. The charcoal burner, for example, reduces the health and fire safety of nearby buildings, meaning you'll want to place it as far away as you can from everything else you've built to avoid harming your island. Some, like the bakery, have both positive and negative effects, so you'll need to figure out when the benefits outweigh the risks when placing your buildings. You can offload a lot of your earlier production to another area of your island, as most buildings that don't produce a final product don't have any effects, but it's always worth checking to see where you can score a few more points. This is also a good time to mention public services, which are found in the City Watch tab. Here, you can access buildings to lessen the risk created by negative effects. For example, your bakery reduces fire safety, but the Vigils increases it, reducing the risk of a fire and putting out any that do occur. The mid-game is also where you'll want to start paying attention to the attributes along the top of the screen. There's a lot of numbers and it looks really complicated, but I promise it's really not that hard to understand, and you only really need to pay attention to like 3 of them. Let's start with the left side at the top bar, since it is much simpler to understand. You have your total denarii, which is the currency you spend on pretty much everything. Your overall balance for your entire empire, so the amount of denarii you're either earning or losing. The total population across your entire empire. And lastly, your total knowledge across your entire empire and progress on any research, which I will come back to shortly. Below this, you have the number of available workers on your currently selected island split into tiers of residents. Over on the right, you have a bunch of numbers, so let's quickfire. Total island income is how much the current island is making. Island population is pretty self-explanatory. Knowledge and faith I'm going to explain in a moment. Prestige affects how often you'll have festivals to boost the stats of your island. Health is of course how healthy your island is, and if this is too low, you can suffer outbreaks of disease, which can really throw a wrench in your plans. Happiness affects how often you have other kinds of festivals, and fire safety is how likely your island is to have a fire, and the higher this is, the better. It seems like a lot, but most of the time you only need to look at island balance and available workers. If these two stay in the green, you are probably going to be okay. Fire and health can also be pretty important, but can be put on the back burner whilst you fix the other two if needed. Lastly, you can click the icon in the middle to take you to the statistics screen. Again, this looks very overwhelming, but I'm going to make it stupidly simple because I'm in fact simply stupid. Click sort by consumption over production until you get the up arrow. Now you can see which demands are not being met by the supply. This goes for every single resource produced on your islands, so lets you know when you need to up production on anything. You do need to apply context to this, like flour mills eat 2 farms worth of wheat, but if you only need 1 bakery, it's fine to be at 50% efficiency. But for the most part, if you see something where the white line is bigger than the green, then you should probably increase production of that good. This is such a useful screen for finding issues on your islands quickly before they become major problems. If you notice a resource is running low or your island isn't running optimally, coming here and checking for deficits will almost always lead you to a solution. Soon after you unlock plebeians, you will also unlock the Sanctuary and Grammaticus buildings, and these are how you make use of 2 newer features to the Anno series, Faith and Knowledge. These 2 mechanics may be fairly new, but they're also both extremely simple to understand. Faith first, since it is the easiest by far. Building the Sanctuary will generate belief for every building in its area of effect. This can then be used to gain bonuses based on which patron you choose to dedicate your island to. There are currently 8 to choose from, but at the start you will only have access to 3. Each of them will provide bonuses to certain areas of production on your islands, along with other unique bonuses such as increased population, cheaper tougher ships, or cheaper more powerful military units. These bonuses are gained when you reach certain thresholds of belief, both on an individual island basis and gradually between your entire empire. Each deity also has shrines you can unlock, which spread a variety of bonuses to nearby buildings, so it's well worth sticking to each one until you unlock these for some useful effects. Knowledge works similarly in how you gain it, but the way you use it is a little bit different. You still need to place your Grammaticus in the middle of a bunch of buildings to generate knowledge. However, this is then used in the research tree, allowing you to unlock all kinds of bonuses for your empire. This ranges from gaining new effects for products, the ability to upgrade buildings and roads, and even entirely new buildings, ships, and units. The tech tree is vast, so listing everything you can do would take far too long, but to make things simple, I'll sum up the 3 main categories. Economic is how you increase the productivity in your settlements, with all kinds of building upgrades and stat bonuses. Civic upgrades are the backbone of your empire, improving markets and public services such as fire prevention. And military, of course, focuses on empowering your ships and units with new defensive buildings, unit upgrades, and stronger island defenses. This is a very generalized summary, but just know that there is a lot of value to be found here. To progress research, you simply select a project and wait for it to be done. This will go faster or slower based on how much knowledge your empire is generating, so if you want to speed it along, get more buildings producing knowledge and you'll get your research done in no time. However, even with all of this progress, you will still eventually come up against the limits of your island's fertility and have no choice but to colonize a second. Every island in the game has its own set of fertility which dictates which natural resources can be produced there. No island in the game is capable of producing every single resource, so the only way to keep all of your production chains moving is by making use of multiple. To colonize a second island, simply send your ship over to the beach and wait for the outpost outline to appear. Click on this outline and pay the almost certainly exorbitant cash cost, and boom, you have a new island. Island cost is decided by how much land they contain, so if you want to save some cash, colonize a smaller island with the resources you need early on, and save the bigger islands for later. Anyway, once you have your second island, you'll want to develop it alongside your other island, following the exact same steps as before. Once possible, you want to set up production for whatever resource your previous island is lacking, and it's here that you can take one of two paths. You can either produce just the good the production chain requires and send that back home alone, or you can complete the entire production chain on your second island and ship back the completed product. There's not really a right or a wrong way to do it, so I'd probably recommend just sending the single resource early on to save workers, and then set up the full chain later on if the second island is ready for it. Anyway, no matter what, you need a way to move goods between islands, and that's where trade routes come in. To do this, you click on the trade route menu and click Create New Route. Click on your two islands and assign a ship to run the route. You can use your flagship for now, but I'd recommend building or buying a basic 3-slot pentaconter to run this route more permanently. Select the good you want your ship to collect and instruct it to drop off at the other end, and then hit Establish Routes, and you're done. That selected ship will now go back and forth transporting goods until told otherwise or destroyed. At about the time you're satisfying the final needs of your plebeians, you're ready to upgrade to Equites, and at this point you'll be able to travel to Albion. Albion is another full-size map, just like Latium. To move your view there, you can click the Change Province button and select Albion. Alternatively, if you have a number pad on your keyboard, you can hit 2, which is pretty convenient if you're doing a lot of swapping around. When you arrive, you'll be gifted a civilian ship, and just like Latium, you'll want to get exploring to discover all the islands on offer. I'd prioritize the middle of the map this time, since this is likely where you'll find the best islands to get you started. Once you have one that you like with plenty of buildable space, move over to a beach and place a trading post, and the first one here is free. Just like Latium, you start with your basic tier residents and have to fulfill their needs to reach the next tier. However, upon reaching the option to upgrade from tier 1 waders, you now have two options. You can choose to follow the Romanized path, or stick to the Celtic routes. Both have their merits, so it really comes down to your own preferences and the capability of your island. Plus, once you reach the next tier, you'll be able to follow both upgrade paths at once, so it's less of a choice and more who do you want to play with first. Albion has its own list of fertilities, and in my experience, these are a lot more varied than Latium, meaning you'll be working with multiple islands in no time. Alongside this, your Equites back home will start to request items that can only be crafted in Albion, so you'll have to get to work making international trade routes. Doing this is just the same as local ones, only they take a lot longer to go between, so make sure they stock up on resources to last until their return. The only area where Albion dramatically differs from Latium is the marshlands. The islands here are split into normal buildable areas and marshes. Marshland can initially only be built on by certain buildings, allowing you to access all kinds of new resources. It mostly works the same to regular buildings, however paths now cost wood, so expansion can be quite costly. It's nothing major, just another challenge that makes building up your islands a little bit more complicated. Outside of yourself, there will be a range of other player and non-player entities on the map, and understanding what each of them do and how they work will help you make steady progress as the game goes on. NPCs first, since they are dead simple and come in two varieties. Well, 3, but we'll get to that. Neutral NPCs are found at these lighthouses around the map. They can offer you various quests for some extra cash, alongside selling you various items and resources from their homes. You can also sell goods to these by sending ships over, and even sell ships to Diana if you need some extra cash. Hostile NPCs are the raiders you find in both regions of the world. These are aggressive by default and will sink any ships that get close. You can technically take them down, but their bases are very tough, so will require quite the armada. Alternatively, you can attempt to request a ceasefire to buy yourself some peace, but this can eat quite a lot of denarii in the Emperor's favour, so may not always be viable. Most of the time you just have to hope that they leave you alone. If they keep sinking your trade routes, then provide military escorts to keep them safe. And the final NPC is the Emperor. This guy doesn't have an island in the game, but your relationship with him will change over the course of it, and this brings with it a range of effects depending on the direction things go. High reputation reduces the cost of settling islands, improves pricing with traders, allows you to reroll items, and eventually force other rulers to become specialists if you reach the max tier. Low reputation increases settlement costs, removes your ability to trade with others, and eventually causes the Emperor to send waves of ships to attack you. If you survive these attacks for long enough, you'll ascend to the Proconsul status, which grants the same bonuses as the max reputation. When you load up the game by default, there are 3 other players with you. These vary depending on who you choose, but in general, you'll start out neutral towards each other and have a few options for how things should go. Firstly, you can become allied through a series of treaties and pacts. This takes quite a while, as to get your first treaty for trade, you'll need to convince them that you are worth the effort. You do this by excelling in each of the 5 categories listed on the right. Army and naval power are fairly obvious, relating to the number of military units and ships you own. Defensive power is based on the amount of defensive structures you have, such as towers and walls. Economic power is based on your global income. And prestige is of course based on the total prestige of your islands, which can be increased by fulfilling certain advanced needs and building decorations. Alongside this, they're also affected by certain unique factors depending on the ruler and their trades. If you do manage to get an alliance, each ruler will grant specific bonuses to your empire. If you reach the consul or proconsul status, you'll be able to convince other rulers to become specialists, which can provide some very powerful effects. Of course, the other option is war. This is a lot simpler to initiate, but is by no means an instant win button. To declare war, you simply find them in the diplomacy menu and hit that declare war button. This will take you to the war declaration menu, and from here you can choose either an all-out war or a limited war. All-out wars allow you to attack anything owned by the other ruler, so trade vessels, non-military structures, and basically anything they own are fair game. Limited wars only allow you to attack their military ships and structures. Each of these come with varying cost to your reputation that varies based on a number of factors, such as ruler's starting reputation and current power standings. All-out wars also come with the added risk of the emperor stepping in if things go too far, so you're more likely to have to faff around with political meddling. Regardless, once you decide on what type of war you want to declare, you're immediately free to start attacking your enemies, and that brings us neatly to combat. Combat in Anno 1.17 is extremely simple and broken up into two aspects. Ship combat consists of selecting your own ships and right-clicking on enemy ships or structures. Your ships will then move over to an attacking position and attempt to deal damage with whatever weapons you've equipped them with. Ship weapons are fairly limited, so you're looking at arrows, which are the best for moving targets like ships and land units, scorpions, which have greater range and more damage, but require ships to stop moving to fire, so can be a little awkward when battling other ships and are better suited to stationary targets. And catapults, which have the lowest rate of fire of them all, but the greatest range and damage, so are once again best used on stationary targets. You can customize what weapons and other parts such as ores or armor are on your ships from the shipyards, but whatever you pick, ship combat always boils down to sending your fleet to enemies and choosing the best targets to take down first. Land combat is our second aspect, and whilst it's a little more complex than ships, it's still very simple, especially when compared to something like Total War. There are 4 unit types and 3 of them work in a rock, paper, scissors. Melee units are strong versus most things, but particularly cavalry, and are weak to ranged. Cavalry units are strong at taking out ranged units, but struggle to take melee troops on in a fair fight. And ranged units are strong versus melee, but vulnerable to being flanked by cav. Artillery units are weak versus basically everything and tend to align with ranged, but they're more specialised for taking down structures. When controlling your units in land combat, it's a little more involved than ships. You actually have to position your units and cover your flanks to ensure you're not overwhelmed. I'm not going to say the AI is too advanced when it comes to combat prowess, but at the very least you'll want to keep an eye out for units moving to your back lines, and make use of your own flankers like cavalry to take out their vulnerable ranged units. It's very basic stuff if you've played any real-time strategy combat game, but since it's the first time it's been an Anno game, it's worth mentioning. Ships can attack land units, so you can kite enemies over to your ships and give yourself a huge advantage in combat. Other than that, you want to use the rock, paper, scissors to your advantage and take out all enemies as quickly as possible. If you're attacking another ruler, first you'll need to transport your units on ships and unload them once you get there, but secondly, to take the island, you'll need to eliminate all forms of resistance, so defenses, units, and anything else military related. Defenses will require siege engines such as onagers to take out safely, since they have a lot of range, along with hefty HP bars, so melee and regular missile units will take a lot of damage before they go down. Once all defenses and units are taken care of, you'll need to move your units to surround the ruins of the Governor's Villa, and slowly you'll begin to capture the island. Once the bar fills, you'll be presented with a few options for what you want to do with it. You can either spend money or influence to capture it as your own. Doing this gives you the choice to keep things as they are, or destroy everything so you can build it up from scratch for yourself. You can raise it, destroying everything on it and resetting it to an empty island, or you can vassalize it to remain in control but delegate the actual management to someone else. Once you take out all of your opponent's island, you'll be given the option to subjugate them as a specialist, allowing you to put them to work on your islands. And most rulers come with some pretty powerful bonuses. Bear in mind that all of this tends to nuke your reputation with the Emperor, which comes with some pretty hefty penalties, so make sure you either have reputation or cash to burn. He will almost certainly ask you to make peace once you get your opposition on the ropes, so it'll be up to you on how you want to proceed and if the costs are worth the gains. I will say that war is by no means a necessary part of the game depending on the other rulers. It is perfectly possible to have a game with no wars and everyone coexists peacefully, so it really is up to you. At the very least, I'd advise keeping yourself somewhat armed should the worst occur, as this is not a game where you can react quickly if you're not prepared. But with that, you have everything you need to find success in the world of Anno 1.17. There is still lots to discover, such as the DLC Prophecies of Ash with a few new mechanics, but this should cover everything you need to know as a totally new player to either the series or this installment in particular. If you want to get a complete beginner's guide on some other strategy games, then check out this one for Age of Wonders 4.